I contacted Dr. Alan Wanger and his wife Mary because I knew that he was in the possession of second and third generation copies of the negatives of the photographs that were made in 1931 by Dr. Henriet, a professional photographer. He made available these negatives to me, and I brought them to Holland, and in cooperation with the Dutch Holographic Laboratory we digitalized them. And if a professional looks at negatives, he can see how much information is in it. So we estimated that it would be about 200 to 300 megabyte. But it proved to be that most of the negatives had information up to 1 gigabyte, which means 4 times the informations that we estimated. There could be still hidden in these digitalized files a lot of information that we still don't know about.
At first glance, we might think that negatives of photographs taken some 75 years ago would be less likely to yield usable data than modern photographs. But you have to remember that the techniques used back then required much longer exposure times and more light, which means there is very likely much more information on the 1931 Henri negatives than on any of the more modern photographs. Dr. Soens took the negatives to a holographic science laboratory in Amsterdam to see if they would be willing to test his theory. It's important to realize that no other two-dimensional image in existence has been shown to contain three-dimensional holographic information.
The whole body holograms gave us the possibility to see the image of the man on the shroud under angles that had never been seen before. We could confirm a couple of the findings, like for example the round little objects on top of the eyelids that have been interpreted as being coins. We cannot see inscriptions, but we can confirm that they are solid little objects. A point of controversy has always been the position of the legs, because you cannot see that very well on the photographs. On the hologram, of course, it shows extraordinarily well. The left leg was stretched, the foot was put in a diagonal position, fixed to the cross, and then the other foot, the right foot, was put straight in a vertical position on top of the other foot. That's why the leg is bended, and there was used one nail to nail both feet and fix them to the cross.
Having had a chance to examine the holograms, we asked both Dr. Alan Wanger and Tom DiMahala to tell us if there's anything there they hadn't seen before, to give us their impressions of the new data.
The hologram does a remarkable job of emphasizing certain features on the shroud. It gives an astonishing three-dimensional aspect to this. It makes some of the features much more prominent, particularly the scourge marks that we see front and back are astonishingly revealed in the holograms. Also, we see certain parts of the body, such as the toes, some of the hair, and actually we think that possibly one of the elbows on the holograms, which are not really that apparent on the regular photographs.
There are other things as well. For example, we can clearly see there is no distortion of the dorsal or backside image. The fact supports Isabel Pitzik's theory of a true event horizon. Had the body been lying on rock when the image was formed, distortion would have been unavoidable.
Some scientists believe the characteristics of the image on the shroud, such as three-dimensional information from a two-dimensional photograph, the negative aspect of the image, and the fact that the image that appears on the cloth virtually free of distortion are basically holographic. But how could an image containing so much information have been formed? There are those who believe the image could only have been formed by a burst of some sort of radiation. But the simple fact is, nothing like the shroud image has ever been found or reproduced. But that's only the beginning of the astounding information to be gleaned from this amazing image. In spite of skeptics and setbacks, scientists continue their search. And Dame Isabel Pitzik, a particle physicist, believes the shroud has brought science to the threshold of a whole new understanding of physics. While dealing with the position of the body within the cloth, she discovered one of those mysterious properties that cannot be, yet somehow is. An interface that divides the image transport into two hermetically separate yet simultaneous actions and forces, causing the shroud to be taut and parallel on both sides, creating a true event horizon.
In general relativity, we have found that there are certain things called black holes. Now, the surface of a black hole is called an event horizon. And it's called that because right at that surface, the laws of physics seem to change character drastically.
When you look at the image of the shroud, the two bodies next to each other, you feel that it's a flat image. But if you create, for instance, a three-dimensional object, as I did, the real body, then you realize that there is a strange dividing element, an interface, from which the image is projected up and the image is projected down. The muscles of the body are absolutely not crushed against the stone of the tomb. They are perfect. It means that the body is hovering between the two sides of the shroud. What does that mean? That there is absolutely no gravity. Other strange things you discover, that the image is absolutely undistorted. Now, if you imagine that the cloth was wrinkled, tied, wrapped around the body, and all of a sudden you see a perfect image, which is impossible unless the shroud was made absolutely taut, rigidly taut. Everybody thinks that the tomb signifies death. Not at all, the exact opposite. The shroud and the tomb signifies an unbelievable beginning, because in the depth of the collapsed event horizon, there is something which science knows as singularity. This is exactly what started the universe in the Big Bang. We have nothing less in the tomb of Christ than the beginning of a new universe. The resurrection itself belongs to the spiritual world, and I don't think it is the business of physics to talk about it. However, the shroud itself and what made the image leads us to a mysterious gate which opens for us, and it lets us to see a completely different world, an extraordinary world with extraordinary laws.
What are those laws? And do they exist regardless of the age of the fabric? Is this purely a scientific squabble, or could it be there is something here that is far more important than the artifact itself? Is it possible that the energy and information now being detected is actually the information we need to help us overcome the problems we face today? Are the secrets of the universe, perhaps of all creation, locked up in this seemingly ordinary linen burial cloth? Can the image, now known to contain three-dimensional information, also be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ? But there was more. In fact, there was much more still to come. Dr. Robert Buckland, a former coroner and forensic pathologist for Los Angeles County, is well acquainted with the signs of violent death.
This is the body of a 5-foot, 11-inch Caucasian male weighing about 170 pounds. On the head, there are blood flows from numerous puncture wounds on the front, back, and top of the head. There's a swelling over one cheek consistent with a beating. The right wrist is covered by the left hand, but there's a puncture wound in the left wrist consistent with a crucifixion injury. The classical, artistic, and legendary portrayal of nails through the palms is incorrect, because the structures in the hand are too fragile to hold up the weight of a man of this size without tearing free. There are streams of blood running down both forearms, originating in the wrist areas and controlled by gravity, so the blood flows toward the elbows with the arms elevated and outstretched. On the back, there are more than 100 lesions which appear to be scourge or whip marks. Historians have indicated that the Romans used a whip called a flagrum. This implement had 2 or 3 thongs, and at their ends were pieces of metal or bone which looked like small dumbbells. Here you can see how those end pieces from a Roman flagrum fit precisely into the scourge lesions on the body. Here on the front of the body is a large blood stain resulting from puncture of the chest by an instrument like a lance or a spear. This weapon penetrated the thoracic cavity through the pleural spaces and into the heart. Later, after the corpse was removed from the cross and turned, blood dribbled out of the chest wound and puddled along the small of the back. There's an abrasion of one knee consistent with a fall. Finally, a spike has been driven through both feet and blood leaked from those areas and has stained the cloth. The evidence of a scourged man who was crucified and who died of postural asphyxia and cardiopulmonary failure is clear-cut.
When someone is tortured, as the Bible tells us Jesus was during his crucifixion, red blood cell walls are ruptured, releasing hemoglobin into the body. The hemoglobin is quickly broken down, creating high levels of bilirubin, and the wounds begin to clot. Stirp's analysis showed the stains on the shroud were these blood clot secretions, with extraordinarily high levels of bilirubin, exactly consistent with the trauma of crucifixion. Then there was the ultraviolet fluorescence photography that revealed one more incredible clue hidden from the naked eye.
You can visually see these serum stains around the blood stains that were never visible until our team photographed the shroud with UV fluorescence photography approximately 2,000 years after this man ostensibly was killed.
Serum is the liquid component of blood. Composed mostly of water, the stains were invisible on the shroud until ultraviolet light made them appear fluorescent.
No medieval artist could have anticipated the invention of ultraviolet fluorescence photography and said, well, I'm going to hide this serum stain, and 700 years from now, they'll find it. Give me a break.
Welcome to The Point. Very exciting program today. We're going to be talking about the Shroud of Turin. Now, I have to tell you that virtually everybody thinks that the Shroud of Turin is a fraud, mainly because of the radiocarbon dating, which dated it around about 1325 AD. That I don't think the Shroud of Turin could possibly be a fraud, because it's got three-dimensional properties and X-ray properties. The three-dimensional properties in particular cannot be reproduced by anybody today. Nobody on planet Earth can put three-dimensional properties into a two-dimensional cloth. The Shroud of Turin is unique on planet Earth. Now, most people think the Shroud of Turin is a fraud, but you have to remember most people think God is a fraud too. So I want to open your mind and just make up your own mind. Personally, I believe that the Shroud of Turin proves the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that the image on the shroud was caused by a burst of radiation given off at the resurrection of Jesus Christ.